Hello and welcome back, or welcome to everybody who's just joining us for the second session of our Western Canada Symposium for the Canadian Women's Brass Collective. So my name is Merrie and I'm the trumpet professor at the University of Victoria, and I am here in my office on Lekwungen speaking territory. That's home of the Wasanich and Esquimalt and Songhees nations. And we have had a wonderful time already this morning with some guests talking about music and education and indigeneity in Canada. And I'm looking forward to this session. We're talking about whole body health. And we have some wonderful guests joining us also in this session. And in this hour, actually, I'm talking to three, actually speaking only with two musicians, and we're going to hear a live performance from another musician. All three of these people, we have Hannah Gray and Allene Hackelman and Megan Evans, they're all in Edmonton. And in Edmonton, they are on Treaty 6 territory. And I just want to acknowledge that the reason that we are talking about the land that we're on is to pay tribute to it, because we can't be doing anything that we're doing without being on this land, and also to acknowledge the people that have been caring for this land for thousands of years before we came. So Treaty 6 territory is home of the Nahinawak Cree and the Anishinaabe, the Saulteaux, the Niitsitapi, the Blackfoot, the Métis, the Dene, and the Nakota Sioux people. So before we get started into our topic of whole body health today, I know that many of our viewers like to hear music on these sessions. The stories that we're telling, the experiences that we're sharing, and the information and knowledge that we're sharing is, of course, wonderful and valuable, and we love to have that time with you. But also, we're musicians, and so it's great to get just little snippets of some actual performance and music. So we're going to take a couple of minutes now to listen to a horn quartet that Allene put together. She's all four people in the quartet. And she did this during the pandemic. We have all had to be on such a steep learning curve of technology. And really, it has stretched many of our comfort zones. I know this is true for me. And this has been done in an effort to continue to bring music to the community, both in our teaching and in public performance, and also to keep inspired ourselves as artists and to kind of, just challenge ourselves, which of course is our nature as musicians. And so I think we should all be really proud of that work that we've done. And Allene jumped into a little bit of learning a cappella, and that's how she did this video. So we'll just have a listen now to this quartet performed by Allene Hackelman. Wonderful. Thank you, Allene. It's really great to hear music today and every day. So just a little word to our viewers as well. This is being archived on the Canadian Women's Brass Collective website, and it will appear there later. Right now, we're live stream on Facebook and on YouTube. So this session, this hour, is about holistic health. And there's a focus specifically on pelvic floor health, which is an area of specialty of our first guest. And then we'll go into mental wellness and specifically meditation as a routine and for performance focus. So I'd like to introduce first Hannah Gray, and I have not had the pleasure of meeting Hannah in person. I hope that happens someday. That's one of the wonderful things about this forum, is that we get to connect with each other and share time together, even when we're not, in fact, in the same place. Hannah is a tubist, and she performs and lives in Edmonton, and she's also a professional personal trainer. So we're thrilled to have Hannah talk about one of her areas of expertise, which is pelvic floor health and how it relates to being a brass player. I also want to mention that if there are any questions, feel free to write them into the chat, and we'll find time to get to them during the session here. So welcome, Hannah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's really awesome to be part of this panel with all these awesome other female brass players. It's great. I'm here to talk to you today about pelvic floor health and how it relates to our careers as brass players, and also to our roles as women, and for those of us who have chosen to be mothers, that plays a part in it as well. I'll tell you a little bit about my background. I went to the University of Alberta and Grant MacEwan University and studied bass, trombone, and tuba. And then I played freelance for a bunch of years, and I married a trumpet player. And one of us, after we had children, had to find a different career because it's really hard to find childcare for two musicians kind of hours, right? So I switched careers following weight loss of about 110 pounds. I had always sort of struggled with obesity and mental health issues that go along with being a larger person. And after that, I thought if I could help somebody else go, find their way through that, that would be something that I could be really proud of. So that was about going on 18 years ago now. I've been working full-time as a personal trainer for about 16 years. I'm a medical exercise specialist, and I have a specific interest in women's health and pelvic health. I am also a birth coach, and I train a lot of musicians, predictably, and I also train a lot of women who are having pelvic floor issues. So I do a lot of pelvic floor rehabilitation, and also just coach a lot of women through pelvic health considerations, because I also do a lot of coaching with people who are doing barbell sports, powerlifting, and Olympic weightlifting at higher levels. So pelvic health plays into just about every part of our lives, and I think it's awesome that we're having these conversations at this point, because it seems to be this kind of buzzwordy thing that everybody talks about now, but it never used to be something that people wanted to mention, right? So it's awesome that we're having these conversations and we're talking about these things, because it's something that I feel like women's health has sort of, kind of fallen by the wayside a lot in mainstream medicine. And it's something that, we would come to, we'd go to a doctor or something and say, I'm having these issues. And they'd say, well, that's just part of being female, sorry. Or just don't do what you want to do and everything will be fine. And that doesn't really fly. And we have to have these conversations in order to find strategies and find ways to work around keeping our bodies healthy and doing the things that we want to do. Also, as musicians, we have to consider ourselves athletes first and foremost, because in order to maintain any kind of career longevity, we have to look after our bodies, because if our bodies don't work, then we can't play our instruments and we can't communicate with our audiences, right? So that was sort of how I ended up doing the things that I do. And I really I'm excited to talk to everybody about pelvic floor health as far as it relates to playing a brass instrument, because this is like the most nerdy little molehill that I can possibly get into. So I'm super excited. I love this stuff. Okay. So So if we talk about what our pelvic floors look like, I'm going to get my little teaching pelvis going here. Pelvic floor is a muscle group. Ooh, I cannot figure out which direction my camera is facing. So the pelvic floor is it's a tiny little muscle group. It's about the size of the palm of our hand. So if you kind of put your hand over your vulva area, that's how big your pelvic floor is. It's this teeny tiny little muscle group. There's a lot going on in there. If you look this, wow, if you look in that direction, you can see that there are a lot of layers of muscle, and we could dive into each muscle's sort of role, but we won't today. It'll take too much time. But it's this tiny little muscle group, and it is arguably the hardest working muscle group in your body. It has 5 jobs. Number 1, it serves as a support for all of our pelvic organs, so bladder, uterus, rectum, colon. It also serves as a locomotor and stability for our lumbar spine. Number 3, it's a sump pump. It plays a really active role in returning blood back to our hearts that has been out in our extremities. Number 4, it is a super important muscle group in sexual function and childbirth. And number 5, it's a sphincteric muscle group that aids a lot in excretion. And so we'll talk a little bit about how that happens and what has to happen in order for us to not be leaking while we're playing our instruments, because that's the most sort of common complaint that people come to pelvic floor physiotherapists or to me with those, with that kind of symptom. Although pelvic floor symptoms could span anything from leaking, from painful periods, low back pain, postural issues, and hip pain. There's any number of symptoms that can manifest themselves, and it's kind of like this nebulous thing where we have to be detectives and figure out what's really going on there. So when I see somebody for the first time and they think that they may have a pelvic floor issue, there are a lot of questions to ask. So it's a complex sort of set of problems that can manifest themselves, and we have to kind of put on our detective hats and figure out what is actually going on there. So super important little hardworking muscle group. And so in most of us, this little muscle group is tired all the time. If you are not like inside 6 weeks postpartum, most of the time it is any issues that crop up are due to tension and not weakness. That muscle group wants to cramp up. Our muscles come in two different sort of fiber types. We have tonic muscles and we have phasic muscles. And the phasic muscles are the muscles that move our bodies around. And our tonic muscles are the ones that don't necessarily move our bodies around, but they are sort of the guy wires that hold up our skeletons. And and all of the pelvic floor musculature falls into that tonic sort of group, where when it gets tired, it tenses up. Most of our phasic muscles, when they get tired, so if you're in the gym doing bicep curls and your biceps are starting to quit, they'll just say, okay, that's it, see you later, we're done, you can't do any more bicep curls. The tonic muscles can't just dump our bodies into a heap on the floor, so they tighten up when they respond to fatigue. So when we have pelvic floor dysfunction or pelvic floor issues, 99% of the time it is due to tension and not weakness. So that is point number 1. That is super important. One thing that I forgot to mention right at the beginning is that 1 in 3 women suffer from pelvic floor dysfunction at some point in their lives, and that's huge. And I think it's actually a higher number than that. And I think as we start to talk about these things more and more, I think 1 in 3 is underreported, because just about every woman I know, and certainly just about every woman in the gym, whether or not she's had children, is showing some sort of symptom of pelvic floor dysfunction at some point. So it's something that we all need to keep kind of keep in mind and keep at the forefront so that we listen to our bodies and do what we need to do to take care of them. So now getting into how the pelvic floor relates to being a brass player. This is kind of cool. The pelvic floor works in conjunction with your diaphragm, and everybody knows if you're a brass player, we know about the diaphragm. We know what it does. Pelvic floor works underneath the diaphragm. So if the diaphragm is here, pelvic floor is here. They kind of work like little jellyfish. So they move in mirrors to each other. So when we take a deep breath in, the diaphragm comes down, pelvic floor comes down as well. And when we take an inhale, when we exhale, pelvic floor comes up, diaphragm comes up. Okay. The pelvic floor and the diaphragm form the top and bottom of the abdominal canister, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more later on. And all the way around the sides of the canister are all of our abdominal muscles. So our rectus abdominis, our transverse abdominis, which goes from hip to hip and kind of acts as a sling to hold everything in. Our obliques, in the back, our quadratus lumborum and our latissimus dorsi muscles. All of those muscles sort of form a canister shape. And that whole abdominal canister works together to keep our bodies upright and give us the power that we need to play our instruments. So when we're playing, we are creating intra-abdominal pressure. So we need to sort of consider that, the diaphragm is going up and down, the pelvic floor is also going up and down, and we need strength in those sides of the canisters in order to manage that intra-abdominal pressure. I could talk for like hours and hours about this stuff, and we could even talk about, the diastasis recti if you have been pregnant, where those muscles come together in the front. Talk for hours. I could talk for hours. So where those muscles come together in the front, there's sort of a seam, and that seam, in most people's cases, comes apart when we're pregnant. And so it starts to, those muscles start to pull apart. And that's a normal thing that happens with pregnancy. And that's sort of something completely, I'm going off topic here, but that's something that we need to sort of think about when we're talking about managing intra-abdominal pressure as well, because if we've had children and we're coming back to playing our instruments, management of that diastasis recti is also part of the rehabilitation that you'll have to go through in order to rehabilitate all of those muscles. So, if you go to sort of a more traditional, like a doctor or a more traditional physiotherapist, they will often tell you that intra-abdominal pressure is to be avoided, and it's something that's really bad, and it's something that's going to create pelvic organ prolapse, blah, blah, blah. That's not a good enough solution as far as I'm concerned, because so many people have been told that, if we present with all these symptoms, they're told, well, you can't lift, you can't run, you can't play your instrument, you just can't. You just have to stop. You have to avoid intra-abdominal pressure at all costs. However, intra-abdominal pressure is not something that we can avoid. It's not realistic. And telling us to avoid it is not helpful, and it doesn't solve the problem. What we need are strategies in order to surmount these obstacles that are in our path and get back to functioning the way we want and living our lives the way that we want to. When we play brass instruments, we're creating a ton of intra-abdominal pressure. If you play, especially if you play trumpet or the French horn, not so much with low brass, but it's definitely still a thing. We're creating a ton of intra-abdominal pressure, and we need strategies to manage that. So, we need to, what we really need to look at is increasing our tissue capacity for loading instead of giving up and thinking, okay, well, I can't, intra-abdominal pressure is bad, therefore I just can't play my instrument, or I'm going to have to change my strategy for breathing or whatever. It's not going to be helpful. So we need to manage fatigue, and we need to build our tissue capacity. Now, my very biased opinion is that in order to accomplish this, we need to participate in some kind of strength training. Any strength training that you do for your entire body is going to help with intra-abdominal pressure management, because in order to pick up anything, if you have to bend over to pick up groceries or a child, we're creating intra-abdominal pressure. So what we need to do is figure out how we're going to manage that. So getting back to that canister piece, when we take a deep breath, remember that the diaphragm comes down, pelvic floor comes down, right? If we're going to take a deep breath to play, pelvic floor comes down, diaphragm comes down, we've got intra-abdominal pressure, and we've got pressure going down on that pelvic floor. What we need to do is fire up all of that bottom part of our musculature. So the transverse abdominis that goes from side to side, from hip to hip here, needs to support. We also need to support all the way around, that whole 360 degrees of the canister, in order to take some of the stress off of our pelvic floors. I'm going to get into that a little bit more. So we'll talk about positioning and being proactive about keeping that pelvic floor safe if it's tired and if it's worn out. What we need to do is think about how we're going to stack up our domes. So we talk about the domes in when we're talking about rehabilitation, and when we're talking about alignment. So the domes, all of these dome shapes that we have in our bodies, the pelvic floor, diaphragm, also the glottis, palate, and then the top of our head. We want to keep all of those stacked up. If one of them is out of alignment, or if one of them is a little bit funky, then air is not going to travel properly, and we're putting pressure in weird places on our pelvic floor. So we want to make sure that we're keeping all those domes stacked. When we're sitting, we want to make sure, I'm going to show you this side here. We want to make sure that the weight is on the sit bones, or these bottom humps of muscle here, or bottom humps of bone. I can figure out what muscle and bone is. So we want to line everything up so that we have pelvic floor down here on the bottom, but we don't want to be rocking backwards into our seats, and we also don't want to be rocking forwards so that the weight is right on our vagina. Okay, so that's like priority number one. We want to make sure that our posture is in a good place so that we're not putting all the pressure down on a point that's already weak. Okay, so we want to stack everything up on the bone. Domes are stacked up. Ribs need to be also stacked up over the pelvic floor and over the hips. If the ribs are funky, and if the ribs are sort of out of alignment, and we've got an extra curve in our lumbar spine, then we've broken that canister shape. So if we have our abdominal canister here, if the ribs are lifted up too high, then we've opened up that canister and it's not straight anymore. Okay, and then we've sort of compromised our structural integrity there. So we want to tuck the rib cage in, make sure that we're breathing through that whole 360 degrees and not just out front. And I see a lot of people, a lot of brass players, and particularly male brass players too, who have so much expansion, or so much capacity for expansion out front, that they've weakened all of the muscles that are around it, and also sort of compromised their spine health and stuff too. So getting everything lined up and functioning properly is sort of paramount to making sure that we can maintain our careers over the long term. So when things do kind of go sideways, and when we develop tension in the pelvic floor, often it's going to be on one side or another, and that's where you're going to start feeling, there might be low back pain, there might be hip pain, there might be feelings of heaviness. There also might be urinary leakage, fecal leakage. Painful periods are another thing that we have to watch out for. And when that happens, the best thing to do, obviously, is to get checked out. Go see a pelvic floor physiotherapist first of all. But if you know that it's pelvic floor pain, the first thing that we need to do to deal with that and sort of dive into what's going on there is figuring out whether it's a weakness problem or a tension problem. As I mentioned before, 99% of the time it's going to be a tension problem. So we need to make sure that we know how to relax that pelvic floor. And I'm super excited to listen to Allene talk about meditation, because meditation and guided meditation relaxation are one of the biggest sort of solutions that we can go to in terms of relaxing those pelvic floor muscles. Deep breathing, making sure your breathing pattern is dialed in is another big one. And we want to make sure that we can stretch it out, maintain full range of motion in our hips, in our low backs. So stretching and strengthening is paramount to keeping that pelvic floor healthy. I'm just going to touch on, I think we're starting to run low on time, right, Merrie? Am I running over?
That's okay, Hannah. Yeah, you go right ahead.
I'm just going to keep on talking until
you bet.
Stop. So, everybody's heard of Kegels probably, and Kegels are sort of the exercise that people associate with pelvic floor dysfunction and pelvic floor weakness. Now, Kegels are prescribed all the time by people who are not super familiar with treating pelvic floor dysfunction. And here the problem with Kegels. Kegels are named after a dude, and they are a system of exercises that are not, most of the time, they are not taught properly and they are not executed properly. So going straight to Kegels is often the opposite direction that we want to go. We want to go to relaxation first and make sure that we deal with any tension that's there. And then often that will take care of the problem. If there is weakness, if it's a weakness problem, then we can go to Kegels or pelvic floor contractions, and we can talk about learning how to fire up those muscles, get them innervated, get them supporting and lifting the way they're supposed to. What I see most commonly with people who come into the gym and they say, well, I've been doing my Kegels, I don't understand what's wrong. Everything was coming apart, and now it seems like it's worse. And oftentimes people associate Kegels with just stopping the flow of urine, right? And that is often the place where things are coming apart. And so we're going to take this tired little muscle group and we're going to start squeezing it and squeezing it and squeezing it. And often that will make the problem worse. And, sometimes it'll make it better just by increasing the circulation to the area, but often it's sort of counterproductive. So that is my soapbox issue with Kegels. They sometimes help if they are executed properly in a program where we're talking about, okay, let's figure out how we can make all of these muscles work together better, which is not just squeezing the flow of urine, but it's a squeeze and a lift. And if you are ever curious about it and you're in a private place, you can stick a finger in there and feel whether you're squeezing and lifting or just squeezing. And it's noticeable. It's a noticeable difference. So you'll know if you're doing it right. So we want to get that squeeze and lift going. And then we also want to make sure that we can relax effectively. Okay. So making sure that we get that relax. In a lot of cases, we'll get somebody who can squeeze really well, but then they can't relax. And so you get up into this squeeze position and then they're like, now what? I can't figure out where to go here. And so people, we get to where we're supposed to hold that Kegel all day. That's another myth that I hear a lot, where you're supposed to hold a Kegel while you're playing. That's impossible. Has anybody ever tried that? That's crazy. So we need to be able to relax those muscles so that we can properly expand and we can, support from the bottom, but not be squeezing, because we're not going to sound good. Okay. I'm going to go on and on and on, but I think I better stop. Are there questions?
Yeah, that's great. This is really wonderful information, Hannah. I think we're all quite mesmerized. And if there are any questions, then feel free to throw them into the chat, because this is an opportunity for Hannah to answer them. She also has a website which has been posted in the comments, and you can check out more of her expertise in that area. I love it that, you know, this topic is part of what I was hoping to contribute with this session, like the whole day, which is part of breaking down stigmas, breaking down barriers, and just opening the conversation to things that we want to be talking about, we need to be talking about, and creating a place of safety. And where there's safety, there's vulnerability in a very, very positive way. So thanks for all this great information, Hannah.
I have a question for you, Hannah. In terms of strengthening what you call this area, like all around the middle, sort of the core, what ideas do you have for exercises that would work really well for brass players for like strengthening all those supportive trunk muscles? I forget what you called them. And also being able to keep them flexible enough to like breathe fully all through them, like you were mentioning, into the back and the front.
Yeah, that's an awesome question. Thank you for asking it. So what I would tend to go to is anything that's going to build stability. Things like planks, side planks, dead bugs. Those are sort of the big three that are going to build stability in all directions and get you resisting rotation, resisting flexion. For postpartum moms, what we don't want to do is get a lot of spine flexion going. So in a lot of cases, if there's a diastasis recti happening there, we don't want to do a lot of spinal flexion, because that will get those muscles moving farther away from each other rather than pulling closer together. So anything that we can do to load those tissues without going into a flexion where they're shortening is going to be good. Also, a plank can be considered an anti-extension exercise as well. So anything where you're resisting extension, so we're pulling our rib cage down back into neutral. Anything that's going to challenge your rotational strength is also awesome. Working the transverse abdominis and the hip flexors as well, because that's another big one. By resisting extension and rotation, those are all good sort of movement patterns to practice.
Hannah, you mentioned planks and dead bugs. Do you want to just cover what that means?
Oh, sure. I'm speaking exercise. So plank is where you're going to support yourself on your elbows and your toes, or your elbows and your knees. Anything where you're supporting your body in a horizontal position. So if you have your hands on the floor and your feet on the floor, like you're going to do a push-up, and just hanging on to that position for 10 to 20 seconds. Anything longer than 20 seconds is not, there are all those plank challenges and stuff on Instagram and Facebook and stuff, where you're trying to hold a plank for a minute or 2 minutes or half an hour or whatever. We don't really want to go into those places, because that's where we're going to start looking to create tension that's going to kind of become a systemic problem. So 10 to 20 seconds is the best is sort of the best time frame to hold those exercises for. Dead bugs are where you're going to lie on your back, and arms and legs are going to go up in the air, and we're going to drop one hand in the opposite leg. So anything that where we're resisting extension from opposite sides of the core. So we're extending from one arm and the opposite leg, and then going to the other arm and the opposite leg.
Okay.
Yeah,
fantastic. That's super helpful.
Awesome.
Great. Well, I think we should move forward to the next segment of this session. And I'd like to introduce, we've already heard from Allene with her beautiful, amazing playing and her great questions as well. Allene is the principal horn of the Edmonton Symphony, and she's also on the faculty at the University of Alberta. And Allene and I have met a few times at conferences and such, and she actually is from the West Coast. She's from Vancouver. And it's really great to be able to spend this time together, Allene. I know that, it's very infrequent that all of us get to visit each other around the country. And so I'm really grateful to the CWBC for creating these opportunities for us to be together. So Allene has jumped into the world of meditation, and she's going to share a little bit of her own experience, the why, what, and how of this practice, and share her ideas for performance and mental health training and wellness, which of course is a topic that all of us have in the periphery all the time, and sometimes is very much in the forefront. So welcome, Allene.
Thank you so much, Merrie. I'm super honored to be part of this and just to be interacting with all these wonderful people. I feel like we could have like a whole other session on pelvic floor stuff with Hannah. That's so interesting, especially as someone who had a 9.5-pound baby and a C-section. Going through that and trying to manage going back to playing was quite the thing. So I wish I knew more about it. But anyway, I know that meditation and mindfulness have been covered in a lot of the previous sessions on the Women's Brass Collective site. And I've walked, I've looked through some of those, and there's been so much great info shared on those and inspiring. But I think it's a topic that just doesn't get old for us as performers. And I'm so glad that that meditation and mindfulness has like really entered the mainstream, because so what I thought I would do is just talk about my personal experience with it. And I am not an expert by any means. I'm a beginner meditator. And so I just thought I'd talk about my personal experience with it and some of the things that my eyes are opening to in terms of the overlap between mindfulness and performance and practice, and how my eyes are being opened in these realms. And hopefully it's interesting and people can relate to it. But there were some great sessions like on self-compassion in the last, that's what she said, that were really great. And so I feel like just building on that is important. So like I said, I'm not an expert. I started meditating in January of 2020. It was like my New Year's resolution. So I got onto the 10% Happier app from actually another horn player, Rochelle Jenkins, who's super cool. And I've never actually met her in real life, but we're like internet horn friends. And she posted a lot about this 10% Happier meditation thing. And like, what's this all about? So I decided to get it. And I started at the beginning of 2020, obviously before everything got crazy. And so I'm glad that I had a couple months of like normal life to establish myself in the practice before the pandemic hit, because I feel like it's something that if you pull it out in a time of crisis, it's not going to, I feel like it's best to really practice meditation when things are normal, and to keep it going as a regular practice, so that when the really stressful times come, you have sort of laid a groundwork. I feel like it's probably really challenging to get started with something like that when you're in the midst of a stressful life situation, although that's probably when most people would sort of think, oh God, I need some help, things are spinning out of control. I'm going to try and meditate. But I feel like it's useful to sort of just lay down the framework for yourself when things are a little bit more normal. But I totally wish that I had seen the value in this earlier in my life, because I feel like it just sort of has such amazing ripple effects through everything you do and can help you stay more grounded. But it's not like I didn't have experience with it. My father has been a meditator my entire life. He practices transcendental meditation, and every single day he meditates and always has. And even before he was in the Canadian Brass, because the Canadian Brass, they all do TM, and that's their like thing. But my dad did it before, because my uncle, his brother, went to India and learned all the stuff, and he knows how to initiate people into the practice. So he initiated me when I was a kid, and I was like, I don't get this. I can't do this. I don't know what this is all about. I didn't see the value in it, so I never practiced. And so it's not for lack of people telling me it was a good thing to do or having examples there. I just didn't. I think you have to come to it on your own. Like if it doesn't speak to you, then you can't force it. So I'm just at a time in my life now where it seemed like, okay, I feel like my mind is always so busy that I'm always like, I feel like I'm missing out on my own life sometimes. Like, I just feel like the day goes by and you're like, what just happened? You know, whenever you're doing one thing, your mind is spinning ahead to the next thing on the to-do list, and you feel like it's very hard to be present. And as a mom, I've noticed this even more. It's like, okay, enjoy your time with your child. He's only going to be this age once. But then I'm like, oh, well, I got to cook the dinner and I got to go to the store. And, you know, I have this mind that's just like constantly doing this, and it drives me nuts. Like, I just want to be chill. So I'm like, maybe meditation can help with that, you know? So even when something really pleasant was happening, it was like, I couldn't be there for it. And then afterwards, I didn't have as strong of a memory of it, or, you know, you can't recall the sensations. So, yeah, sorry, I'm off track.
Oh, this is really resonating, Allene. Like I'm like, oh, she's talking about me.
Well, yeah. And I think that is one of the biggest misconceptions about meditation, is that you have to like calm your mind, that you have to turn off that water fountain of thoughts. And the most powerful thing to me that I have to remind myself on a like minute by minute basis is that it's not about shutting off the thoughts. It's about relating to them in a different way. So just seeing them for what they are, letting them be there, but not getting churned up into the stories and narratives that your mind spins out with in your relating to those thoughts. So, yeah, so it's like feeling the feeling, seeing the thought, and dropping the story that goes around it. Because I think when we get in trouble is when we start to just sort of spiral and be like, I see it in the practice room. I'll be like, oh, that doesn't sound good. I suck. I'm never going to be able to do that. It's like, boom, boom, boom. You leap onto this train of, and then, so anyway, that's part of like learning the mindfulness. You sometimes see things about yourself that you habitually push away, or, you know, are used to sort of squashing down, and in order not to deal with them. So I feel like it requires a little bit of bravery. But just to like step back a little bit, if you're not familiar with the practice, you just sit in a quiet place. I use the 10% Happier app. So there's guided meditations on there. You can just do it with a timer, with nothing, but you sit in a quiet place, you sit upright. You can close your eyes or keep them open, and you just focus on your breath and the sensations in your body, the feeling of the breath. And then when your attention wanders, you just kindly and gently drop that and come back to the feeling of the breath. So basically, you're just exercising the concentration muscle. So it helps to build focus, which has obvious ramifications for us as performers. So really, it's working with concentration and training your attention, and just being in the moment, which I find is something that's harder and harder with all the technology and stuff, which is a great distraction. But I find that as I've gotten older and there's more technology around, I feel like my attention is even more fragmented than it ever was, because you just never have these moments where you're just sort of bored and staring out into space. You always just pick up your phone habitually. So anyway, so that's the practice, and it sounds really simple. And I think what I didn't understand at the beginning is like, how can this have an effect on anything in my life? It's just sort of boring, but actually it really does. So one of the teachers on the app that I really like, Sharon Salzberg, she talks about the qualities of concentration being presence, calm observation, willingness to start over, and gentleness. And when I thought about that for myself, I thought these are all things that I suck at doing in the practice room. For some reason, me as a performer, I find it easier to be really focused and in the zone when I'm performing. When I'm on stage, I'm like, there, you know, I can do it, because I feel like my training has lined up that way. But when I'm in the practice room, the mental chatter starts up, and the self-criticism and the, you know, that voice inside, the comparing mind and all that sort of stuff. And so that's the place where I felt like I really needed to bring these qualities in. So just being present, calm observation, not like, oh my God, your low notes sound horrible and you're never going to be able to do that. But like, okay, well, that doesn't sound so good. But in what way does it not sound so good? Okay, well, what might you be able to do about it? And just calm down. Don't like spin out in all the stories. And that's something that got talked about a lot in the previous session with just self-compassion and what a superpower that is. And I really believe, like, I think when I was younger, I sort of thought it was a really good thing to be very hard on myself, because that's like how you get ahead. You know, you're driven, you're tough. You're like, no, that's not good enough. It's never good enough. And you push yourself, and that's how you get stuff done. But I've come to realize now that that is not a healthy not a healthy mindset, and it's not sustainable. So I don't know. After all this time I've been doing it, I find in some ways actually things start to feel harder, because you just notice more of that stuff about yourself that's like a little bit unpleasant. Like, oh, this voice in my head is so negative all the time. It doesn't feel good to hear it talking at you. But as you become better able to hear it, I think then you can decide what to do about it. And so for me, where I'm at right now in this stage of my meditation practice is I'm just learning to be aware of what's coming up, of those little negative voices and those criticisms and those negative things, and then not doing anything about it. I'm just watching. And I feel like the more I practice, the longer I practice, the more it's going to become clear to me how to bring about change if I want to. But it's not about like changing yourself. Right now, for me, it's just about training my mind to just be a little bit more present. And I think that's going to eventually like lead to some conclusions and hopefully some positive changes. But right now I'm not putting pressure on myself to like, okay, you got to fix it, you know?
I love everything you're talking about, Allene. It's really, I think, resonating with a lot of people, certainly myself and other people watching. It sounds like kind of a theme of your meditation practice, or meditation practice in general, is just observation.
Yeah.
And observation is what we need in the practice room as well. Like, not judgment, not criticism, just what is, and where do I want to go from here? Just bring it back.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm thankful for the time that I've had this last year to really make the practice an everyday thing. And to, just take the time to just in the practice room, not feel like, okay, I got to learn all this music and get this stuff done. I can just sit there and be like, okay, what am I noticing right now? How's it going? How am I feeling? How am I relating to what's going on? And another really useful description I read that I liked was working on your concentration. It's a tricky thing, because if you sit there and you go, concentrate, damn it, it doesn't really work. It's kind of like, it's very elegant in that you have to actually just kind of release and let go. Yeah. And we're so trained as musicians to just effort more to get the job done, right? Yeah. Like, that's what I feel like I do a lot of the times, just like tough it out and go for it, Whereas in meditation, it's sort of counterintuitive. You have to just sit back and let things happen and be open. Yeah. And that's the only time you're able to notice. So a description I read is cultivating the ability to let go of distractions rather than clinging to concentration. And I really like that one because.
Yeah. Do you want to just repeat that one more time?
So cultivating the ability to let go of distractions rather than clinging to your concentration. That one kind of spoke to me, because it's like when I'm feeling super distracted in the practice room, I tend to sort of just be like, concentrate, damn it. Can't you get it together? But maybe just like sitting back a little bit and being like, okay, that distracting thought just came in. I'm going to like see it and let it go.
And let it gently. Go. Yeah. That's fantastic. So just a couple of quick questions before we move on. Do you meditate as part of your practice, or is it separate and just part of your being as Allene? And is it in the morning or the evening?
I do it when I can fit it in. I know, like, for some people it's more helpful to have like a regular time. It probably would be for me too, but I can't kind of be that organized. So I just do it whenever I can fit it in the day, and I try to do it every day for like 15 minutes.
Okay.
And Yeah, actually, I do find it helpful if I can organize myself to do it for 15 minutes right before a practice session. That actually really helps because it just sort of calms you down. And one other thing I wanted to mention about it, on like riffing on what Hannah was talking about, is the easiest way I've learned to become more grounded in the moment is to actually focus on your body and the sensations in your body. And I've in my life been a pretty like disembodied person, I would say. So not noticing where tension is creeping in to my body and to my playing over a long period of time. And then sort of when you're meditating, grounding yourself in physical sensations is a really good way to draw your attention back. So I'm noticing a lot more things about my physical body when I'm playing that are very interesting and kind of eye-opening. So mind, body, and breath, all those things for meditation and for brass playing are so important.
Fantastic. Yeah, so many gems in there. So this is really special, this session, and I'm thrilled to be hearing all of the insights that both of you have had. And we're actually going to close with something that is a real treat and a gift for all of us, especially after this incredibly long time of basically no live performance. There have been a lot of live performance online, but a lot of it is pre-recorded, and there's something very special about somebody performing for you in that moment. And that's what's going to happen right now. And we're going to have Megan Evans play the Nocturno by Franz Strauss. And this is a real gift, as I mentioned, because we can know that it is being created in this moment. And even after the pandemic is done, I think we really need to be advocates, you know, in our personal lives and our professional lives for how unique and special that is. Live performance is just about sharing something, that reciprocity, the energy between the listener and the performer. And it's not about getting that perfect take in the can. It's about really just creating a moment of magic. So please welcome Megan Evans to perform for us. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Megan. That was really a joy and such a lovely piece and beautiful, beautiful playing. Thank you. And thank you to all three of you for this wonderful session and for sharing your insights and your artistry and your experiences with us. So we're going to take a break now. The next session for today's symposium will start at 2:30 on West Coast time, and that's 5:30 Eastern time. And so you'll have time to have a break and get some food. And the next session is called Life Balance. We're going to jump into the important topic of finding balance in our lives, offer some stories and tips and sharing experiences on things like preparing for auditions while working, parenting while performing, navigating life stresses, losing balance, finding it again, and just finding our way in this high stakes and high level world where we can put so much pressure on ourselves, but we realize that there is also a support network around us. So looking forward to seeing you then, and thanks for joining us.